Hi, I'm Dan Costa, editor-in-chief of PCMag.com, and this is Fast Forward, where we have conversations about living in the future. This is a special South by Southwest 2018 edition of Fast Forward. And South by Southwest is, of course, where artists, technologists, and business leaders get together in Austin, Texas every year to talk about the future. My guest today is Tim O'Reilly, something of an expert in the future. You may know Tim as a longtime advocate for open software. He's probably best known as the founder of O'Reilly Media. That's the company that makes those books with the funny animals on the cover that have basically informed an entire generation on how to code, how technology works, and how the world works. Tim, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thanks for having me.
So you've got a new book out with more of a mainstream audience called WTF. And I'll get the full title, WTF, What's the Future and Why It's Up to Us. And I know it's a little cliche to sort of dig into a book title as the first question, but I think there's enough packed into WTF that I think we should just be clear with the audience. Yeah. Why did you call it that, and what's the meaning behind it?
Well, first of all, WTF does not stand for what's the future. Everybody knows what it really stands for. And my point is that when we think about the future, and particularly the role of technology in the future, we say WTF all the time. And it can be a WTF of amazement and delight, or it can be a WTF of amazement and dismay. And I wrote the book because I wanted to call out a number of trends that I think are going in the wrong direction, also other ones that are going in the right direction, and really try to urge the industry towards creating that WTF of delight and not participating in the headlong rush towards making a worse world that we're all going to say, what the fuck, you know, and we don't want to be there. And so we have a unique responsibility as technologists to think about the consequences of what we do. And we're at a point where we're starting to see some of the consequences, and we need to actually think pretty hard about what kind of future we want. So the most important part of the title are the ending words, which actually I got from my wife, Jen Polka, founder of Code for America and the former US Deputy CTO. She basically said, one of her sayings is, nobody is coming, it's up to us. So she actually suggested that I work that into the title, and it makes total sense because that is a core message of the book. We have some choices to make.
It's a crucial, and I definitely want to get to that. I've wanted to start with the optimistic message, which I think is something we tend to skip past a lot of times. But I mean, you and I have been in this industry for a while. We remember a world where there wasn't an internet, and there wasn't this, and the idea of a global brain was a metaphor and hyperbole that that we threw around at conferences that nobody really took seriously. And now we're living in a world where that is the world we're living in. This is happening now. So what do you think people what should they appreciate about the technological world we live in today?
Well, I think the first thing they should appreciate is the world of technology that goes all the way back to the very earliest technologies, stone tools, fire, the wheel. All of these were amazing things that made us more productive as a species. That's why we are arguably the dominant species on this planet. Maybe we have a few rivals in the form of a few bacterial diseases, or
they took their toll.
But basically, we're the top predator of this planet because of technology, and we are, each successive wave of technology has made us richer as a species. We're able to support, albeit with some problems, pretty serious problems, 7 billion people on this planet. We wouldn't do that without technology. And so, and there's a really amazing site that everybody should look at. It's called Our World in Data, done by this guy Max Roser at Oxford. And it's basically a series of graphs and blog posts about progress. And there's a couple that are really striking, and one is life expectancy. And you see human life expectancy from the 1500s up to the 1800s, and it's kind of a little bit up and down, usually down. It's pretty flat, except when there's a war or a plague, in which case it really drops. And then suddenly, in the early 1800s, this is actually, you start with the UK, and you just see it just go up and to the right in that classic Silicon Valley formulation. And then you actually interactively can add other countries. And you can see whenever they join the Industrial Revolution, up and to the right. And that's this amazing point. We're living twice as long as our ancestors on average. And then there's other graphs, like you look at the number of people in the world living in absolute poverty. Technology is doing a pretty amazing job. So I like to say technology is our superpower, and inequality is our kryptonite. The fact that we are basically having this amazing gift of increasing productivity, and it continues to go up and to the right. But if you look, for example, here in America, average household income is not going up and to the right. It's basically flattened out starting in the 1970s. And why is that? Well, because certain people are keeping too much of that for themselves. Now, a lot of economists have talked about this, and there are a number of great books. But one of the things that I saw was that there's a unique contribution that the history of the tech industry can make to that debate. Because what I've observed in my career is that when companies try to extract too much and don't create enough value for everyone else, they start to falter in the same way that our economy is faltering. So I watched Microsoft go through that. They basically started out in this explosion of opportunity that was the personal computer revolution. And then they took all the value for themselves, and everybody went, well, there's nothing here. And they migrated elsewhere. They migrated to the web, to open source software, built a new revolution. And I've watched bit by bit as Google and Facebook and companies like that take the value out of the ecosystem.
And there's an argument to be made that, we watched this happen with Microsoft. Yeah. And Microsoft today, I have to remind people, is not a failing company. It's a very successful company.
Yeah, and in fact, they've kind of gone back to, under Satya and Nadella, really thinking about how do they create value for their ecosystem of customers and suppliers and people who work with them. So,
but seeing that pattern, and we've seen it a couple of different times now. Is the right solution to just let Facebook run its course, let Google run its course, let Apple have its time in the sun, and then eventually they will exit the stage or they'll evolve and new companies will take over? Is that the lesson that we should learn?
It's one approach. But I was really I was trying to write some lessons for companies, because I do think, for example, when I look at a platform, an aspiring platform company like Uber, you go, okay, if you actually internalize this message up front, that you're a marketplace, that it can't, we have this religion in Silicon Valley that if you do right by your users, it's all okay. And I go, no, actually, these are two-sided markets. So like there was that sort of PC market where there were all these people providing software, and then suddenly there were just a few companies, and it's a much less interesting market. Guess what? Your platform's not as valuable. Okay, look at the web. Google slowly eating the web. When they launched, about half of their revenue came from advertising on third-party sites. It's now down to about 18%. It's a little bit less visible than it was with Microsoft, but they're basically, oh, you have a really interesting service. We will include that because it'll be better for our users. And they go, well, but it's not necessarily better for the health of the overall ecosystem. And so, of course, there are parallels in our society, where we basically say, oh, well, we're going to create monocultures because that's what's good for our users. We're going to make wheat everywhere. You go, well, it's not so good for, other creatures. And then eventually you start to unravel the web of life and go, oh, wait, not so good. So I think, I'm trying to create some lessons for the up-and-coming companies that they can do better by thinking more holistically about who depends on them. But I also was really trying to take lessons for society as a whole, thinking that this, tech is sort of it's almost like a much smaller ecosystem where you can see these impacts and make the case. And of course, that rise and fall of platforms is just one piece of it, because I also looked at a lot of other lessons, for tech companies. Now, obviously, there's a lot in the book that's just really practical, strategic thinking. I unpack the business model of Uber and Lyft and say, okay, well, how much is this model of a networked marketplace enabled by algorithms, augmenting workers so that the barriers to entry for them to come into the marketplace are lower? How much does that apply for other companies? And I think it applies quite well. And there's really a guide to strategy there. But I also then really take it and look at this question of algorithms and algorithmic systems. And I kind of walk through things like, to kind of educate people, okay, here's how Google search quality works. Oh, here's how it's gone wrong with Facebook and fake news, so that you can understand that these systems have an optimization function. They're trying to optimize, often, I call it in the book a fitness function, because I'm trying to tie it back to this idea of fitness landscapes, which is a concept from evolutionary biology, but called fitness function or objective function. For the algorithm, Google is trying to optimize for relevance so that you get the result you're looking for.
And it's in these technologies, especially like Google has that one outcome.
Yeah.
Facebook was optimizing for engagement,
yeah,
and it was very, very good at it, but it wound up creating this distortion in people's feeds.
That's right.
And you say even in a larger pace, a lot of technology companies are optimizing for returning shareholder value.
That's right.
To the exclusion of everything else. And all of these systems are just not well-rounded enough to be sustainable, I think is the case you're making.
That's right. That I think, and in particular, this notion of shareholder value is, in some ways it's just an analogy, but also not quite, because I really start drawing a picture of artificial intelligence and the fear of artificial intelligence. And all of the fears basically are stories of what you could call a runaway objective function. The paperclip maximizer, whatever. Although I loved Elon Musk's formulation in a Vanity Fair interview where because it was just sort of clever. He describes the self-improving strawberry picking robot that eventually decides humans are in the way of strawberry fields forever. Because you give it this objective function, pick more strawberries, and if it eventually finds new ways to do that, that can go out of whack, and you can kind of see this runaway objective function at work with Facebook. And I make the case that we gave our financial markets an objective function, maximize shareholder value, and we didn't realize that it was going to end up becoming hostile to humanity, that it was going to be, well, heck, if we're a drug company, we should water down the warnings about opioids because that's good for shareholder value. Which is exactly what happened. They watered down. They said it's not really addictive. These drugs are fine to prescribe. They created all kinds of incentives for them to be overprescribed. And then, sure enough, we have an opioid crisis. It was like this was because the master algorithm was saying, make money. Do these things that will optimize, your profits. Don't think about these other issues. And again, so I'm trying to say, look, we have to actually build better rounded algorithms. And kind of going back to Google search, you get that quality when you get it because they're taking hundreds of factors into account. They're not just optimizing for one thing. And my point is that we can in fact improve our algorithms. And there's kind of a meta message in the book, which is that a great deal of success in the 21st century is in the design of marketplace algorithms. And if we can design better algorithms, we can have better outcomes, and not just for the tech platforms themselves, but for all of society.
Where does that design come from? Because I think that in the book, I got a sense that it's very much from an ethical perspective, from a moral perspective, a little bit of common sense, but not necessarily a business perspective. And I'm like, do you think that there's a way to make the case so that shareholders will be fine? And the employees will be taken care of, and society will benefit. Well, and therefore it's good business.
I guess what I would say is, when you say shareholders will be fine, you have to look at how we have moved the goalposts on that. And I didn't talk about this in the book. It was something that came out later, but there was an article in the New York Times earlier this year called "The Tale of Two Janitors," and it described the different career opportunities for a janitor at Kodak 35 years ago, when Kodak was one of the nifty 50, one of the hot stocks, and at Apple. And this janitor at Kodak was a full-time employee, had access to all the benefits, including rich educational benefits. She rose through the ranks and eventually became the chief technology officer of Kodak. Meanwhile, the janitor at Apple is not even an employee of Apple, is an employee of an outsourced janitorial services firm. She will never have access to those benefits, doesn't have benefits at all, and is stuck in a dead-end job. And I was actually talking with one economist who was saying, well, these companies have monopoly profits, they could afford this. And I go, really? At its peak, I looked this up afterwards, Kodak's peak profit margin was 8.9%. Apple, what, 22, 23%? Yeah, Apple could easily afford to say, no, we don't need to outsource all those kinds of things to cut our costs. But they're in the grip of this system that says, you must optimize for this constituency that's actually doing nothing for Apple. I mean, think about it, just when you understand how wrong this is.
It's just capital.
But Apple doesn't need the capital. Yeah. Sure, there was a couple of periods in their life where they needed capital. They got some from Microsoft, when they nearly went out of business, and Microsoft needed an enemy. A competitor that would keep the illusion of competition alive. Later went on to become real competition, but they didn't need that much when they were a small company either. They rapidly found customers. So capital contributed very, very little to the rise of Apple. And today, nothing, because Apple makes so much money that if again, apart from the psychological belief system that said, oh my God, if their stock crashed and went to zero, there must be something wrong. But in terms of the capital they actually receive from the market, it is zero. In fact, what they do is they give capital to the market, and that's the whole point when Carl Icahn says, I'm going to buy $6 billion of Apple stock. It's hoping that he can get stock buybacks to push up the price. So it's capital extraction. It's not, so if all of the market went away, Apple would be unaffected, apart from this psychological thing. But if their customers went away, they'd be screwed. If their employees went away, they'd be screwed. If their suppliers went away, they'd be screwed. If the rule of law that sustains our society went away, they'd be screwed. And yet here's this force, the market, saying, hey, don't pay your taxes, because, hey, that will reduce our earnings. Keep that money from going to taxes. Oh, yeah, you can pay your highly paid employees, because we get that they're valuable. Don't lower your prices for customers, and so you see this perverse set of incentives, where the player in this multi-party, transaction has managed to convince everybody that they should get all of the value. Now there are cases where companies really do need capital. Elon Musk is a great example. Amazon needed capital for a long time. Tesla, Uber and Lyft. But even there, think about Uber and Lyft. Would they have done better if they had grown organically? Rather than spending enormous amounts of capital just trying to kill each other.
I certainly think the culture at Uber would be healthier.
Yeah.
And more sustainable, and they wouldn't have gotten so far off track because they were moving so fast.
And when you look at, the guy who is arguably the most successful, tech entrepreneur, Jeff Bezos, he's actually just defied the market. He's just said, look, I'm going to sell, he's done this amazing jujitsu where he said, believe in me, I'm going to grow and I'm going to take over the world, so give me this enormous valuation. In the early years, it was a bit of a harder sell. And then he's relentlessly lowered prices for consumers. He's actually, I think, over time, paying more to workers. There's some really interesting research by Michael Mandel of the Progressive Policy Institute, where they're looking at e-commerce salaries much higher than the salaries in retail. They're hiring, there's actually people were like, oh, the retail apocalypse. There's been, way more people hired in e-commerce than are jobs that are lost in retail. So it's actually becoming this, net job engine as well as this incredible engine for consumers.
It was interesting because I haven't seen a lot of people put Jeff Bezos up as that type of hero in context of the larger tech market. And there's a lot of back and forth about where this new Amazon headquarters should be. I mean, if you were running a small town or even a large city, would you be advocating to get an Amazon headquarters in your city? Do you think that would improve the life of the citizens of that city?
It's a bit of it is a hard call because yes, I think it would improve the life of a city, but asking for incentives for that, I think almost all of these scams, whether it's sports stadiums or incentives for companies to come and create jobs, it's a bad use of public money. And I'm really proud of our mayor in Oakland, Libby Schaaf, who just refused to play that game. It's tough because the Warriors going to San Francisco, so on. But you do all the research. If the city is asked to pay,
and they always are,
it doesn't actually pan out. It's an incredibly expensive way to get jobs, and it's again, one of these games in which our capital system, which should easily be able to pay for this, has figured out how to get an edge and how to get pressure, and in this market, dynamic to basically take advantage of other players. And so again, I would just say no. If you're a city, just say sorry, go somewhere else. We're a great place to do business. Come here because of that.
We talked a little bit, we mentioned artificial intelligences, but I think, I want to get your thoughts on this. It seems clear that we're heading to a future where we're going to have robot cars, we're going to have robot trucks, we're going to have chatbot call centers that interact with us. We've already got algorithmically generated news stories that are filling our feeds. But you're of the opinion that we're going to have enough jobs.
So there's a couple of things. First of all, we already see the evidence of this. When Amazon put robots into their warehouses, they put 45,000 robots in between 2014 and 2016. I haven't seen the number since then. They added 250,000 workers because they didn't just do the same thing more cheaply. They found more to do. They said, let's get more products in, let's get them out faster. Let's do same-day delivery in a lot of zip codes. So they've upped the ante. And when I think about all of the things that are not getting done, more productivity is going to be better. So there's a big pile of work to be done that we're not getting to. Just look around our crumbling infrastructure. You go, put all the robots to work, and then put all the people to work. We could do both. And then when we get all of that done, even if we got everything done, the robots are out there and we have this world of incredible plenty where the robots can do everything. Why is it that we're going to just basically say, well, some very small number of people get all the benefit of that? It's like, what did we do before? We reduced working hours. We took kids out of the workforce and sent them to school. We did all kinds of things that actually were a net transfer of that productivity to society. And right now we have this model where we kind of think, well, it's capitalism or it's the welfare state. And I go, no, there's all kinds of different ways for this, balance to be different. Corporate profits are at an all-time high, and it's because the benefits are not being shared. And they should be. We should have lower working hours. We should have much stronger educational benefits for ongoing, continuous education. Companies, and again, companies are investing in this. You look at someone like Google is saying, well, we need more machine learning engineers. We need more people who can do AI. We're going to, put our training out for free. We're going to try to build this. They're doing apprenticeship programs. That's, I think, a big part of the future. Invest in the workforce. But even beyond that, I just look around, and the fundamental question seems to me to be that the fundamental answer is that if you give people money, if people have money, let's put it this, they will build an economy for you. Just walk around, any wealthy city, and you look at all the ways that people are entertaining, sharing. Here's food. Just this amazing, thing which is a commodity today, and yet the variety and options in food are so much greater. When I was a kid, there was a French restaurant, an Italian restaurant, a Chinese restaurant, and that was it. Now there's hundreds of cuisines to choose from. You don't just have one or two mass market beers. We're here in Austin, original home of the microbrew. You've got hundreds or thousands of unique microbrews. This is a rich society. It basically creates product. People create unique products. It's the creative economy is not just about music and literature. It's also about making products that people want to wear. Fashion, art, experiences, travel. There's plenty to make an economy. Even if the machines are doing all of the things that nobody else wants to do.
You don't think we're going to run out of work?
I don't.
The flourishing will not.
No, the flourishing, I mean, again, John Maynard Keynes put it beautifully in economic possibilities for our grandchildren, this essay he wrote in 1929. The real economic problem is how will we make the economy, once all the necessary stuff is taken care of. And I go, we kind of can already see that, because if you have, in any rich society, you have people who have a lot of leisure and they make an economy anyway. And so I guess I would just say it's a choice we're making not to distribute the fruits of productivity more widely, and it's a bad choice.
So let's get to that choice. It's right there in the title that the future is going to be up to us.
Yeah.
Most people, I think, in this country at this point don't feel that way.
Yeah.
They feel like they can't get off Facebook.
Yeah.
They feel like if they don't use Uber, they're not going to be able to get a cab. And they just don't feel like they've got a seat at the table politically or socially or in some degrees technologically as well. What is your advice to them? What is the recourse for taking control of it?
I would just remind them of a time 250 years ago in this country when people felt exactly that same way. You remember, what was the call of, the Boston Tea Party, no taxation without representation. That idea of, we're not going to be ruled by this system anymore. And I actually had a line in my book where I said, we will, future economic historians will look back on this period when we, thought less of our ancestors for believing in the divine right of kings, while we still believe in the divine right of capital. And it's funny because somebody read that and said, oh, have you read Marjorie Kelly's book, The Divine Right of Capital? And it's this fabulous book written in 2001, in which she says, okay, here's the fundamental idea of a profit and loss statement. It's, profit equals revenue minus costs. Now, when was it that profit in that equation got substituted for, so you could write that, you could expand the terms of that, and you could say profit equals, cost of capital plus cost of labor plus cost of materials plus, whatever other costs, right? You could unpack all, but somehow we moved, cost of capital and return of capital to the profit side. And of course, when you're saying triple bottom line, you're actually saying, no, all of them deserve a return on there. It's like profit should be returned to all of those inputs. When we say we have to worry about the environment, in some sense, that's the return to materials. We have to kind of keep that virtuous circle going. We need a return to labor, and we need a return to capital. And those things should be proportional to the value as inputs, which is why I look at our system and I go, well, guess what? You don't actually need to have a return to capital, have such an exalted position in this sort of hierarchy of who gets what and why. And that's why I come back to this idea of and again, in some ways, Silicon Valley is a giant hack on that system, because if you look at what do companies like Google and Apple do, with their shares, they give them to their employees. It's just it's actually a way of giving this extra outsized return, to labor, while still pretending to be in this capital system. But it's this siphoning off of some of that value. But so much of the system is around optimizing, for this financial capitalism. In the old days, part of it is I have a unique view on this, which I write about in the book, because even though I've been, part of Silicon Valley in some sense, for my entire career, I'm really operating by a different system. I don't have investors. I started my company with $500. We grew the company to a couple of $100 million in revenue by selling things to people who wanted them. Yeah, just like we sold them services originally. We're a tech writing consulting firm, and then we sold them books, and then we sold them conferences, conference attendance, and then we built an online, service, Safari, which is it was originally ebooks and then became video training, is now live online training, all those things together, and it's all been funded by customers. So we live in that world of I make something you want, you give me money, and we use the financial system, as a backstop. We borrow money, for example, against receivables, or when we had started Safari as a joint venture with Pearson. When we bought them out, we borrowed money to do that. But it's all this world of cash flow and profit. Whereas so many of the Silicon Valley companies, we're building a financial instrument. First we're going to sell it to a VC, and they're going to give us a valuation, and then we're going to get another VC who's going to give us a higher valuation, and then eventually we're going to get somebody to buy us. Maybe we'll get to go public. And again, some of these companies going public don't even have value, but people are able to peel out massive amounts of money. Snap, is like still not profitable. Twitter still not profitable, and yet you have billionaires. So it's and again, it's kind of funny because it's I like to think that a lot of Silicon Valley companies are a little bit like the financial instruments that were being created by Wall Street in 2006. They're like, hey, is there some greater fool who will buy this thing? Now, some of them turn into something that's really valuable, and so that's why we excuse that system. But I think we could improve on the system if there was less capital, more focus on, hey, make real shit. And let's use capital when it's needed. Like there are businesses that need capital, but there's an awful lot of it which is just a game, where we're trying to, basically the actual design of the business is to produce a higher valuation. And I had that experience so many times talking with VCs, talking with entrepreneurs. Anytime an entrepreneur, you say, how are you doing? And the first thing they tell you about is what their latest valuation is. They're thinking wrong about the business. What I want to hear is, wow, this is what we did for our customers. This is how our business is growing in the real economy, where we're making something that people want.
All right. I want to ask you my closing questions. So is there a technology trend that worries you and concerns you and keeps you up at night?
I think there are the things that keep me up at night from a technology point of view. I think we're not worrying enough about biotech. I do think that there's wonderful upside to biotech, but there's some really, really big downsides. There's way more sort of worrying about rogue AI, which apart from the argument I make in the book that we're already living in a world of rogue AI, without sort of fully independent conscious AI or whatever. There's just way too little thought about biotech, and I think that. And I also think, the other thing that keeps me up at night much more urgently is this question of inequality. Because if we, don't build a society that works for everyone, they eventually will make, a lot of trouble for the society as a whole. And you have, wars and revolutions. And, you just look at what's happening, particularly with external threats like climate change, which are going to require us to step up in a whole new way. And I look at, if we have frittered away our time, if we have frittered away our opportunity to make a better world, and then suddenly we're just fighting for survival, it could really become a dog-eat-dog world, even more than it is today.
Trying to end on a more positive note, is there a technology, a gadget, a service that you use every day that still inspires wonder?
Well, I still think the internet is a thing of wonder. I think the ability to harness, people into, at much greater scale. I mean, that's really one of the things that we have to understand. This ability to get people to work together at larger and larger scale has been a key to the progress of civilization. And we have all these systems and methods that were developed in the 19th and 20th century, which have to give way to something bigger and better. And I do think that that's the positive side of these algorithmic systems. Think about it for a minute. Facebook is coordinating, the output of billions of people. And for all that's wrong with it, it's sharing that out. Google, there's billions of searches, and people are finding information. You can manage so much more. There's 1 billion products for sale on Amazon, and that's what algorithmic systems make possible, where we can coordinate the market in some sense in a way that we never could before. And I think as we move into the 21st century, we have an opportunity to design better markets. As we use more AI, more data, and those markets will be better when we realize that you measure that by the increase in human welfare, not by the increase in dollars that are captured by the platform owner. And I'm really seeing an awareness of this. You see someone like Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, world's largest asset managers, talking pretty seriously about social responsibility, about that companies can no longer just have this profit motive be guiding their strategy. We see companies like the Boston Consulting Group and McKinsey, which are kind of like the consiglieres to, or the World Economic Forum that kind of guide companies. They're all thinking pretty hard about this and saying, no, we have to have a more balanced approach. And so I'm really optimistic that if we start saying, well, how do we have a better economy for everyone, that we now have new tools to figure that out, with these incredible algorithmic systems that actually can help us do a better job of allocating that, the resources towards things that matter, and allocating and distributing the fruits of productivity to everyone.
Very cool. Tim, the book is WTF, What's the Future and Why It's Up to Us. You can put your own title on that at home if you'd like. That's Fast Forward. Thanks so much for coming by and talking to me. This has been great.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
That's Fast Forward for today. You can find back episodes on PCMag.com, on Apple Podcasts, on Google Play. If you like the show, please give us a review. I very much appreciate those. I'll see you in the future.